Hello and welcome to Focus on Israel and the Palestinian Territories. My name is Paul Calvert. Psalm 28 verse 7 from the New King James Bible says this: "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart greatly rejoices, and with my song I will praise him." I'm with Brian Schrauger. Now, just recently you were on a special trip to the UK, Brian. Tell us a little bit more about the trip.
Let's see, this happened at, the end of July. I went with a group of Israeli kids, about 130 children with cancer. It was a trip sponsored by an NGO, a nonprofit based here in Israel called Zichron Menachem. Zichron is a Hebrew word for remembrance, and Menachem is the name of a son of a couple by the names of Miri and Chaim. And their son died of cancer, back in the 1990s. After he did, Chaim had a dream, and he felt like it was a vision that was calling them to help families, children with cancer and their families, to encourage them. Basically, they felt that they could take what they had learned through 14 years of dealing with their son who had cancer, and they could help families have a better experience in the healthcare process than they had done. And so they started this thing back, I think it was in the 1990s, shortly after Menachem died. And now they are in 4 or 5 countries around the world, and their focus is not only on the children with cancer, but also on their siblings and parents. And one thing that they do is they have 3 outings or vacations, I guess you could say, with these kids every year. And the trip I went on was to London, 130 kids plus another 110 support staff. Wow. All expenses paid, week in London, visiting a number of different sites. It was just a marvelous experience.
So all these children, they were suffering from cancer at the moment?
They were. Now, some were in remission, but there were a number of kids there that were in the middle of their cancer treatment. And they ranged, the kids that were on the trip ranged in age. I think the youngest was maybe 6 or 7, and the oldest was 25. So they had quite a range of kids dealing with different issues and in different developmental stages. So what they do is they divided the children into 4 groups by age. And the younger kids, they all had sponsors with them, big brother, big sisters kind of things to help them. And then in the second group, they were a bit older. And the third group was the teenage years, and the older were the young adults. And they took them, and these kids, both with cancer and some in remission. The most remarkable thing about these kids who have faced the possibility of death and a lot of suffering was the degree of life. I mean, they were the most buoyant, upbeat group of kids that you could ever want to be around. It was really marvelous.
Now, were some of these children actually going through their cancer treatment while they were there in London?
That's one thing, yes. And it's one thing that makes Zichron Menachem especially unique. They brought along top-of-the-line oncology physicians and nurses and support staff, and they brought equipment. They brought a full clinic with them so that kids who were going through chemotherapy or needed other kinds of medication could actually be treated while they were on the trip. What that does is it allows kids to go on this trip who otherwise could not go because they would have to go into a hospital to have their blood counts taken, maybe take a chemo treatment or something like that, or have their lines cleaned or changed. All of their medical needs were being addressed, and so they were able to come on the trip.
So they wouldn't have been able to come on the trip if it hadn't been for the fact that doctors and nurses were there as well to help them along the way.
Exactly. And it was really a delight because you had a number of volunteers. There was the medical team, which were, like I said, there was one man I got to know very well was a bone marrow transplant specialist, and nurses that were specialized in taking care of these kids. But there also were volunteer security. They had a top-of-the-line Israeli security team. Wow. Yeah? And these guys, really, really high professional security people. And they're all volunteering their time. They all come as volunteers. And then, of course, there were a number of volunteers of... Zichron Menachem is one of the most sought-after places for people who, instead of going into the Israeli military, do a service thing, right? And everybody wants to serve with Zichron Menachem. So there are a number of young people that were there as volunteers to work with the kids, maybe just do logistics, make meals, things like that.
Was this a break from the real difficulties that the children were facing and the youth were facing?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the benefits for these kids is that it's such a positive experience that the very anticipation of the trip, as well as being on it, is healthy for them. Yeah, they actually are pumped, and the atmosphere is just delightful.
So it's a sense of hope, giving them a sense of hope, and that hope actually is a sense of healing in one sense.
It does, and there is a connection that is argued, and I think it's true, that when your attitude is positive and when you're happy, your body is going to do a better job of taking care of your health needs than when you're not.
What sort of things did you do in London?
Well, let's see. The first we flew there like early in the morning. We landed, checked into a hotel, and then immediately got on a bus and went to the London Eye, which, as you know, is the biggest Ferris wheel, at least in England. And we all went out, like 240 total of us going on the London Eye, all in bright green T-shirts that said Zichron Menachem. All the kids were chattering in Hebrew. And it was just quite an interesting thing to actually be walking along the River Thames there with all this team of kids that had just arrived from Israel, chanting, singing, and going on the London Eye. It was a lot of fun to watch people looking at the kids and realizing what's going on here, recognizing, of course, that there are kids that had cancer because there were kids who didn't have their hair. Most of the girls who lost their hair wore wigs, but still you could tell that there were some unhealthy children there. And I wondered if I would sense any resistance or anti-Semitism toward the kids, and I didn't. There was a real warmth and kindness, at least that I perceived as I was on the ground with them. So we went to that first day we went to the London Eye. We went to an old synagogue that night and had a big dinner. And then we get lots of sleep at night. And then we were up the next morning going to a theme park. We went to theme parks. We went to, at one point, Madame Tussauds. Another day they took us to a racetrack. I can't remember the name of it, but it's about an hour or so south of London. And there was a club of people there who owned supercars. And they all volunteered to give these kids a ride in their, 500,000 pound plus cars, right? It was, and all the kids as well as the adults were all pretty excited. That was a lot of fun. So these kids got a first class vacation, and all of their needs were also being addressed. None of their needs were ignored. And that also included their psychological, emotional needs. So what was going on that wasn't seen during the day is that at night, all of these kids would meet in a support group after they got back to the hotel. They'd spend about an hour just talking together, sharing what was going on in their lives or what they're dealing with. And then throughout the day, too, there were people that were always standing by. So any kid who had something that he or she wanted to talk about or deal with, or a problem they had, there were always immediately at hand experts there to talk with them and help them.
Were these just Jewish kids, or were they Jewish kids and Arab kids? Were they from different religions as well?
Well, that's what I loved. One thing I really loved about this is that while Zichron Menachem and the owners and the founders are Orthodox Jews, they reach out and they include kids with cancer who are Israeli regardless of their ethnic or religious background. So we had some Arab kids, Muslim kids. I don't know if we had any Druze, but I know they have had them. They've had Christians, and mostly, of course, the other group that's going to be represented then, Jewish kids, will be Arabs and Arab Muslim kids.
Do many of the children feel that their life is in the balance? Do they not know what's the future holds for them?
Well, yes, although that's not something they don't generally, at least as I was dealing with them, it was very clear they know that they have problems, and they deal with an intensity of life that is unique. Any kid with cancer is dealing with the possibility of, the reality of lifelong problems, uncertainty about their futures, their immediate futures, schooling, and some, of course, even uncertainty about their lives or their friends' lives. So they're actually dealing with life and death in a very real and visceral way that most kids don't ever have to deal with, and even most adults don't deal with it.
Was this an emotional time for them to be able to go to England?
Oh, absolutely. What was really funny is that when I got on the airplane, it was a Boeing 777 LL flight from Ben Gurion to Luton Airport in London. And I think that Boeing 777 seats something like 279 people, and there were 240 of us with Zikron Menachem, all in green shirts. So we all got on the plane, and I was a guest on the trip. So I got on the plane, and as I often do, I put on a sleeping mask, pretty much, and got ready to kind of snooze a little bit. Well, the plane took off, and as soon as the wheels were up and the fasten seatbelt light went off, all bedlam broke out on the plane wide. There was yelling. I took my mask off, and I was immediately creamed by two pillows. There was a plane-wide riot, if you will, of a pillow fight. And it's unlike any flight I've ever been on. So sitting there, normally you would think that the flight attendants would be, oh no, and please get back in your seats. Instead, I took off my sleeping mask after I recovered from being creamed by a couple pillows. I looked up, and the flight attendants were all taking pictures. They actually compete to be on this flight. Wow. There's just a real pleasure in being able to, reach out to these kids who are living life at a level of intensity that's just remarkable, and positivity as well, in spite of their situations. It was a real meaningful thing. In fact, when we landed, we were on the tarmac. There wasn't like one of those bridge things that you walk across to get into the terminal. So we walked down the steps, and we were all waiting, and down came the flight crew after all the kids and all the other support people were off the plane. And there was a group picture, and immediately after the first group picture was taken, the pilot of the plane was assaulted. He was picked up, and he was lifted up in the air while everyone sang happy birthday to him. It was just a really remarkable thing.
Was this personal to you? Why did you get involved?
Well, I have a son who had cancer, actually, a number of years ago. He was 10 years old when he was diagnosed. He had a big tumor, a very large tumor hiding in his pelvic dish. And the kind of cancer he had is it's called osteosarcoma. The tumor's turned to bone. He, 3.5 months later, still 10 years old, of course, had his left hip and leg amputated, and didn't slow him down at all. So I have witnessed firsthand the spirit of these kids, and it was very meaningful to me. And my son Taylor ended up dying of the cancer when he was just 4 days before he turned 12, and this was in the year 2000. So it's been 19 years now, and I'm at a point in my life looking at him and his life with just nothing but great pride and gratitude. He was an amazing kid, and I know he's in my future. He's not in my past. I have wonderful memories, but I know I will meet him.
Were you able to help and encourage the people on the trip because of what you've personally been through as well?
Well, I think so. I think one thing that I was able to bring to the trip as a journalist and writing about it and meeting these kids is I understand what I have a really good idea of what they're going through, and what it's like to be a family member dealing with as a parent. Of course, I was very familiar with it, and having been with my son Taylor through this battle that he went through, I felt like I had a pretty good feel for where these kids were, and I'm not intimidated by it. I'm not scared by it. I'm not put off by it. I see these kids as really unusually gifted kids. In a way, I think they're prophets to the rest of us. We often want to look away when we see children with cancer, and we shouldn't do that. We should really take time to get to know these kids, because they have lessons about how to live life that I think most of us need to witness firsthand and learn from them.
When a child goes through cancer, is it a very stressful time for the child and for the parent as well?
Of course, very, very stressful. The kids have to deal with issues like, it depends on what age they're at. If they're young teenagers, for example, or teenagers, they're having to deal with the issue of suddenly being dependent. They're going through a stage of life when they are beginning to become independent of their parents. They get cancer, and suddenly they're thrust back into a role of being very dependent. That's difficult. They are having to deal with other people who are often put off or maybe unconsciously, they back away from the kids. And so they get identified as kids with cancer instead of just being kids. So it's stressful for them. It's stressful for the parents. Now, the parents had a separate trip to London, actually, in late May, early June. So the parents actually have their own time away from the kids as caregivers to take a break from this incredible stress of taking care of children with cancer.
And that's important as well, isn't it, for the parents?
It really is. It gives them perspective. The thing that happens as a parent, when you're a parent and you have a child with cancer, is you tend to feel very much alone. And even the kids can feel that way too. So one thing that this Zechron Menachem does in the various ways it works with families and these kids is it gives them a support group. It gives them a community that they would not naturally develop, or at least would not tend to naturally develop on their own. And so they can actually share things that are going on, as parents can share things going on. The children with cancer get to know other kids with cancer, and they get to talk to each other, and they're not like, when they talk about what's going on medically, it's about chemotherapy or radiation therapy or physical therapy they're having to go through. Well, they can talk about these things with other kids who know exactly what they're dealing with, right? So it's part of the lives of these other kids, and so they're able to relate. It's healthy for them, very, very healthy.
Now, chemotherapy is one way of defeating cancer. What exactly is chemotherapy?
Chemotherapy is injecting into the body chemicals that are attempting to kill the cancer. The thing is, what chemotherapy does is it comes as close as it can to killing you. Right now, cancer treatments are not yet able to focus exclusively on the cancer itself. And so in an attempt to kill cancer cells, the entire body is diminished in its ability to function. And so chemotherapy brings you right as close as it can to dying, I guess. And so kids are having to deal with low blood counts, with being anemic. So that what happens is the chemotherapy is on the one hand trying to kill the cancer, which inhibits the whole body, and then at the other hand they're being given other medications to try to boost their immune systems.
So there's lots of side effects with this.
Very much, yeah. One of the most interesting ones is loss of hair. And so for boys, this is not generally a big deal. On the trip, you'll see boys sporting, bald heads fairly regularly. But for girls, it tends to be more of a crisis. Their identities are linked to their hair. So one of the wonderful things that Zechron Menachem does is it goes around various countries and gets people to donate their hair, and they actually make their own wigs, which are made available then to girls especially who have lost their hair while they're getting cancer treatment. Now, for my part, there were some times I ran across some girls at we went to a bar mitzvah party one night, and it was at a country club. And a lot of the girls, not being out in the general public, went ahead and took their wigs off. I thought they looked great, and I told them so. I thought they actually looked, beautiful, beautiful girls. And I thought they looked really nice. But, of course, most of them did not always sport that look publicly.
What was the most memorable thing about the trip for you?
For me, it was getting to know some of the kids personally. Actually sitting down with them at breakfast, sitting with them on the bus, talking about their lives, getting feedback from them about how they feel about their friends, their communities, what it's like for them to be on a trip like this. I had one of the most interesting interviews I had was with a young girl who is 14 years old. She's an Arab girl, Israeli Arab Muslim girl. Her eyes were twinkling. She was just delightful. She was so nice to talk to. And I asked her, I said, so how is it for you on this trip, especially when you're around, like on Shabbat? Everyone kept Shabbat there. And so she wasn't able to go out. And she's not forced to be Jewish, but still, there were no events on that day. And I said, have you felt at all awkward or out of place because you're not Jewish? And her first reaction was she looked perplexed at me, like, what? And then she said, well, of course not. That's not even an issue. No one thinks about that. It's the thing that unifies these kids is that they are all dealing with a life-threatening illness. And for them, the religious differences or ideological or political differences are almost as nothing.
So it was a real trip of hope.
Very much a trip of hope. And again, I think what it does is it helps these kids express their love of life, and it allows them to do it in a context, an environment where they're doing regular, normal things. They're not doing hospital things. They're not in the hospital. Even if they're being treated, they're able to be out and do all the fun things that any kid would ever want to do on a trip like this. And they're able to fully participate in life and not feel like they're odd or different.
What's your prayer for children and for families going through cancer at the moment?
That's a good question. My prayer for the kids and for the parents is that they would continue to embrace life, that they would continue to live and express the life that has been given to them in a positive way without denying the reality of what they're going through. There's no Pollyanna wishful thinking going on with these kids. They know what they're dealing with. They're not denying what they're dealing with. But instead of focusing on that, they're focusing on life. And that's something that I pray they are able to continue to do. And this is perhaps the most important thing that Zichron Menachem is allowing them to do, enabling them to do, is to fully recognize their condition, deal with integrity without any denial, but in spite of that, focus on living.
Now, the organization has a website. What's the website address for people who'd like to know more?
The website address is zichron.org, zichron.org. And when you go there, you'll find that there are different country sites, and you can access them from that website. So you'll have it in English and in Hebrew and maybe in French, too. I think, they're in France as well.
Okay, Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. I enjoyed it.
If you'd like to know more about our show, you can join us on Facebook. Just look for Focus on Israel-Radio. Ezekiel 37 verse 4-6 says this, "Again he said to me, prophesy to these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God of these bones, surely I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. I will put sinners on you and bring flesh upon you, cover you with skin and put breath in you, and you shall live. Then you shall know that I am the Lord, and the Jews will receive the real shalom peace."